Sign the papers, Alex. Claire's voice cut through the room like a blade. Laughter followed. Not nervous laughter, relieved laughter. The kind that comes when a burden is finally being removed. Someone clinked a wine glass. Someone else whispered, "Finally." I stood there, surrounded by polished silverware and people who had already decided I was nothing, while my wife wouldn't look me in the eye. Emily stayed close to her mother. Too close. Williams didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence had always been louder than insults. "Let's be honest," Claire said, smiling thinly. "This marriage was a mistake from the beginning." A few heads nodded. Someone laughed again. They talked about my career like it was a punchline, about my ambition like it was a defect, about my future like it was already over. And that was when Emily finally spoke. "I want a divorce." Applause followed. Actual applause. What none of them noticed, not then, was that the man they were humiliating had already outgrown every room they'd ever been in. They thought they were ending my life. They were only removing themselves from it. My name is Alexander Cowan. Everyone calls me Alex. And this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about what happens when people confuse silence with insignificance and learn too late that quiet men often own the world.
Before I take you back to how this marriage began, before you see how carefully I stayed, small so I could be loved honestly, stay with me. Not because this turns pretty, but because it turns true. I remember that dinner. Clearly, the way the chandelier light reflected off crystal glasses, the way I counted breaths instead of words. But the truth is, the ending didn't start there. It started months earlier, when I mistook acceptance for love and silence for peace. Let me take you back. Welcome back to Tales of the Fireplace Family. Here, we share stories that remind us of one truth. Love and loss touch every soul, no matter who we are. We never know when, how, or why, but love always finds us, and its stories deserve to be told. If you're new here, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the moments that change everything. And to our returning hearts, thank you. Your presence keeps this fire burning. Stay with us till the end. Share your thoughts, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Let us continue. The dining room looked like something pulled from a lifestyle magazine. Long mahogany table, crystal glasses arranged with mathematical precision, silverware polished until it reflected the chandelier overhead. Everything gleamed. Everything was expensive. Everything was meant to impress, and none of it felt like home. Laughter bounced off the high ceilings, sharp and effortless, the kind that didn't bother lowering its voice. It rolled over me in waves while I stood there, hands at my sides, feeling like an exhibit everyone had already judged and dismissed. Emily still hadn't looked at me. She stood close to her mother, her shoulder almost touching Claire's arm, as if proximity alone might protect her from doubt. Claire wore that same composed smile she always did, the one that never reached her eyes. The one she used when she was about to say something cruel, but wanted it to sound reasonable. Williams sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken yet. He rarely did when it mattered. His disapproval was efficient, silent, permanent. Someone poured more wine. Someone laughed again. "So, Alex," a cousin I barely knew said lightly, "are you still figuring things out?" A few chuckles followed. I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I'd learned that answering only prolonged the spectacle. Claire tilted her head, studying me the way people inspect flaws they don't intend to fix. "He's always been reserved," she said. "Not very ambitious. But not everyone needs to be." She smiled as if she'd just paid me a compliment. Emily shifted beside her, but said nothing. They talked about my career like it was a misunderstanding that needed correcting. About my work like it was a phase I'd outgrow. About my future like it was something that would never quite arrive. Every sentence landed softly, carefully. No raised voices. No outright insults. That was the art of it. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was precise. That I scanned the table, faces half hidden behind glasses, eyes bright with interest. This wasn't concern. It wasn't even angered. It was relief. Relief that they could finally stop pretending. Claire folded her hands together. We all want what's best for Emily, she said. And sometimes that means admitting when something isn't working. I felt it then. Not pain, not rage, but a strange calm settling into my chest. Because the truth finally clicked. This wasn't a conversation. It was a conclusion. Emily took a breath. I could see it in the slight rise of her shoulders, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. For a second, just one, I thought she might look at me. She didn't. I want a divorce, she said. The words fell cleanly into the room, practiced and prepared. Then the applause came. Not thunderous, not dramatic, just enough. Enough clapping to make the point clear that I watched it all from a distance that surprised even me. The smiles, the nods, the sense of accomplishment passing quietly between them, like a shared victory. They thought this was the end. And maybe for the version of me they'd invented, it was that I wasn't angry. That confused them later, that I wasn't pleading. That disappointed them. What I felt was clarity, the kind that arrives when the last illusion finally collapses. That I looked at Emily then. Really looked at her. At the woman who once said she loved how grounded I was. How calm. How unassuming. She couldn't meet my eyes. I hope you find what you think you deserve. I said. That I didn't raise my voice. I didn't wait for a response. I turned, walked past the table, past the crystal and the silver and the people who had already written me off. Behind me, conversation resumed. Wine was poured. Plans were made. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that the man they were laughing at had already outgrown every room they'd ever felt powerful in. They thought they were ending my life. They were only removing themselves from it, and one day, sooner than they imagined, they would beg for access to a future I already owned. By the time I reached my car that night, the air felt different. Not colder, clearer, like a storm had passed without rain. I sat there for a moment with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, listening to the quiet. It was the first honest silence I'd felt in months, and that's when the memories started to rewind. Emily and I met in a place that felt neutral, far from chandeliers and expectations. A bookstore cafe downtown. She was reading something dense and underlined, the kind of book people pretend to read to look impressive. I asked her about it. She laughed and admitted she was only halfway through. We talked for hours. About ideas. About work. About the strange comfort of not needing to perform for a stranger. Those early days were simple. Coffee dates. Walks after dinner. Conversations that stretched late because neither of us wanted to be the one to end them. I liked that she asked questions and that she listened to the answers. She liked that I didn't talk about money or titles or achievements. She said it made her feel safe, that I never corrected her assumptions. I didn't hide anything, but I didn't announce it either. No flashy spending. No big gestures. No stories designed to impress. I'd learned, long before Emily, that the moment wealth enters a room, honesty leaves it. For a while, it worked. Then she introduced me to her parents. Claire's smile was polite but distant, like a door only opened halfway. Williams shook my hand and asked what I did. When I told him, carefully, vaguely, his interest faded mid-sentence. He didn't ask follow-ups. He didn't need to. He had already placed me somewhere beneath his expectations. Emily noticed at first. She squeezed my hand under the table, changed the subject, defended me when Claire's comments edged too close to judgment. He's thoughtful, she said once. That matters. But approval in that house wasn't granted, it was earned. And the currency was status. Williams talked endlessly about legacy, about what names meant, about how families were built through influence, not affection. He never addressed me directly when the subject turned to success. He spoke to Emily instead, like I wasn't in the room. Claire was subtler. She asked about my plans, my trajectory, my timeline. Always smiling, always measuring. Emily began translating their concerns into suggestions, then into questions, then into expectations. Why didn't I network more? Why didn't I think bigger? Why didn't I want more? I tried to explain that wanting less noise didn't mean lacking ambition, that a quiet life didn't equal a small one. She listened, but she stopped hearing me. Somewhere along the way, love became something I had to maintain instead of something we shared. Dinners turned into performances. Conversations felt rehearsed. I found myself choosing words carefully, editing pieces of myself to keep the peace. That's when I realized something uncomfortable, that I was still present, but I was no longer seen. If you've ever felt yourself shrinking inside a relationship just to remain welcome, you understand what that does to you. And if this part of the story feels familiar, stay with it. Some truths only surface when someone else is brave enough to say them out loud. Emily still said she loved me, but it came with conditions now, with qualifiers, with comparisons she didn't mean to make, but did anyway. And I let it happen, not because I was weak, but because I believed patience was loyalty to be by the time we married. I had already become a version of myself that fit more comfortably into her family's narrative than my own life. A supporting character, a placeholder, standing outside that mansion later, the applause still echoing in my ears. I finally understood it. The marriage hadn't ended that night, that IT had slowly transformed into something else, something staged, something performative, long before the word divorce ever reached the table. What we had stopped being a partnership. IT had become a role, and I was done playing it. Claire and Williams didn't hate me. That was the mistake I made early on, thinking their coldness came from emotion. Hate requires effort. What they felt was far more efficient. They evaluated. Everything in their world ran on optics. Charity galas that weren't about charity. Fundraisers where donations were less important than who saw your name printed in gold on the program. Social circles built like gated communities, exclusive, insular, and merciless to anyone who didn't belong, and belonging to them had nothing to do with character. IT had everything to do with numbers. Claire curated her life the way people curate museum exhibits. Every friendship served a purpose. Every appearance reinforced a narrative. She dressed with intention, spoke with calculation, and smiled like someone who had never once questioned her own superiority. Williams was quieter, but no less rigid. He believed legacy was something you protected by controlling who entered the family bloodstream. He talked endlessly about inheritance, reputation, and the kind of people we associate with. He never said my name when he said it, but he didn't have to. From the beginning, I was a problem they intended to solve. IT started small. Dinner conversations that drifted toward opportunity. Casual mentions of men Emily had known before me. Men with impressive titles, recognizable surnames, impressive trajectories. "Oh, remember Daniel?" Claire would say lightly. "He just made partner at his firm. Such a shame things didn't work out." Williams would nod, as if this were relevant information rather than a deliberate comparison. At charity events, Claire introduced me last, if at all. When she did, it was always with a qualifier. "This is Alex," she'd say. "Emily's husband. He's very grounded." The word landed like a judgment pretending to be praise. Sometimes she'd add, "He keeps things simple," as if ambition were a design flaw I'd opted out of. The sabotage was subtle, which made it harder to confront. Invitations Emily received that didn't include me. Dinners scheduled when they knew I had commitments. Seats arranged so she sat between. Men I was clearly meant to notice. Men who spoke loudly about acquisitions and growth and market dominance. Men who looked at me like I was already gone. Family dinners became exercises in restraint. Passive-aggressive comments passed as humor. Compliments with sharp edges. "You're so calm, Alex," Claire said once, smiling. "Emily needs that, given how driven she is." Driven.as if I were something holding her back, Emily noticed. I know she did. I saw it in the way she tensed when Claire spoke. The way she'd changed the subject too quickly. The way her hand would find mine under the table. "At first, she defended me. He's not interested in showing off," she said. "That doesn't mean he lacks direction. But resistance has a shelf life when it's met with constant pressure." Over time, her defenses softened. Her silences lengthened. She stopped correcting them, stopped challenging assumptions, stopped meeting my eyes when her parents spoke about the future as if I wasn't part of it. That's when I understood the hierarchy. I wasn't an equal. I was in allowance. I was tolerated because Emily insisted, endured because I hadn't yet embarrassed them publicly, accepted conditionally, pending improvement. The truth settled in slowly, like a chill you don't notice until you're already cold. I didn't belong. And the worst part wasn't their behavior. It was Emily's quiet adaptation to it. She learned when to stay silent, when to nod, when to let comments slide. She learned how to live with the discomfort instead of confronting it. And in doing so, she taught them something dangerous, that they were right. The night Claire finally said it out loud, we were alone in the kitchen after dinner. Emily was rinsing glasses. Claire stood beside her, voice low, intimate. You deserve more, she said gently. Someone who matches you. Emily didn't answer, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Sophia was waiting when I got home that night. She sat at the small kitchen table, coat draped over the chair, phone face down like she'd decided nothing on it mattered more than what she was about to say. My sister had always had that way about her. Calm on the surface, sharp underneath. The only person who'd ever known all of me without needing proof. You stayed longer than I thought, she said. They needed the audience. I replied, setting my keys down. I didn't. She studied my face for a moment, then sighed. Did she say it? Yes. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, as if she'd expected nothing else. Then it's time, Alex. You don't have to keep pretending. Pretending. The word followed me as I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter. I hadn't always lived this way, quiet, measured, deliberately unremarkable. There was a time when my life was nothing but momentum. Years earlier, long before Emily, I'd built something in silence. Late nights, empty offices, code and contracts and ideas that refused to let me sleep. Apex Synergy Group started as a theory scribbled on a legal pad, a way to integrate technology, logistics, and finance into a single adaptive system. People told me it was too broad, too ambitious. They were wrong that I founded the company without press, without fanfare. Let other names take the spotlight while I stayed behind the curtain, moving pieces instead of claiming credit. Subsidiaries spread quietly across continents. Infrastructure embedded itself so deeply that entire markets ran smoother without ever knowing why. Global reach. Silent ownership. Power that didn't announce itself. The first time I let someone close after it all began, she loved the success more than the man. She memorized my numbers before my habits, asked about valuations before values. When she left, she took nothing tangible, but she took something else with her, trust. That was when I decided I would never again lead with wealth. I would never let money introduce me. I would never let it speak before I did. Sophia knew all of this. She'd been there when I signed the first deal, when I turned down magazine covers, when I refused awards unless the team was named instead. Emily doesn't know who she married, Sophia said carefully. That's not fair, to you or to her. I never lied, I said. She never asked. That's not the point. It is to me. Sophia stood and crossed the room, lowering her voice even though we were alone. You're letting them erase you. You're letting her parents define you. I looked at her then, really looked at her, at the concern she tried to hide behind reason. I'm letting them reveal themselves, I said. There's a difference. She shook her head. Alex, love isn't a test. Neither is silence, I replied. But it tells you everything. She paused, searching my face. What if she loves you, but she's scared of disappointing them? Then she loves their approval more, I said gently. And that's not something money fixes. Sophia exhaled slowly, frustration bleeding through. You could end this tomorrow. One conversation, one reveal. I thought of Emily's eyes sliding away from mine, of Claire's smile, of William's silence. If love requires proof of wealth, I said, it isn't love. It's a transaction. The room went quiet. Outside, the city moved the way it always did, unaware, indifferent, perfectly functional. Somewhere across the world, systems I'd built were executing decisions worth billions. Markets adjusted. Supply chains flowed. Entire corporations operated inside frameworks they didn't even realize I owned. And here I was, choosing not to say a word. Sophia finally nodded, the way she did when she disagreed but understood. So what are you doing? I looked down at my hands, steady, unshaken. I'm staying silent, I said. One last time. Not out of fear, not out of pride, but because sometimes the truth doesn't need to be spoken to be proven. Sometimes, silence is the test, and I was ready to see who passed it. Ava arrived the way disruptions always do, quietly at first, almost politely. She appeared at a fundraiser Claire insisted we attend, standing near the bar in a dress that looked effortless but wasn't. Everything about her was calibrated. The hair that fell just right. The laugh that carried without demanding attention. She didn't scan the room the way most people did. She waited for the room to notice her. Claire noticed immediately. Emily, darling, she said, already smiling, already moving. You must meet Ava. Ava turned, eyes bright, smile practiced. She took Emily's hands as if they were old friends. complimented her taste, her dress, her composure. Then she looked at me, not dismissively, not warmly, accurately, as if she'd already been briefed. "So you're Alex," she said. "I've heard interesting things." From that night on, Ava became a presence. At dinners that used to be small, at events I hadn't planned to attend. She laughed a little too easily at William's stories, listened a little too closely to Claire's advice. She asked questions that sounded innocent and landed like probes. Rumors didn't start with words. They started with patterns. Ava seated beside Emily instead of across from her. Ava included in conversations that edged toward the future. Ava's name slipping into sentences where it didn't belong. "She's very accomplished," Claire said one evening. "Focused. Driven." Williams nodded. "She understands what it takes." Emily said nothing. When I asked, gently, who Ava was, Emily shrugged. "Just someone my parents admire." The first rumor reached me through someone else. A whispered concern. A sideways glance. The implication that Ava and Emily were closer than appearances suggested. I dismissed it. Not because I didn't see the signs, but because trust, once given, resists its own erosion. Then came the announcement. Not private. Not careful. Delivered the way news is delivered when it's meant to be undeniable. Ava was pregnant. The room went still. Then voices overlapped. Shock sharpened into excitement. Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Not in surprise, but delight. "How wonderful," she said, already calculating that I didn't ask the question everyone else avoided. I didn't need to. The narrative assembled itself faster than truth ever could. Claire moved quickly. Faster than I thought possible. "This explains so much," she said later, voice low, intimate. The tension. The distance. Emily stared at the floor. Williams cleared his throat. "It's unfortunate," he said, "but we must consider appearances." That was the word that sealed it. Appearances. The scandal didn't belong to Ava. It belonged to me. Or at least, that's how it was framed. Whispers turned into assumptions. Assumptions hardened into certainty. The idea that I was inadequate, that I'd driven Emily elsewhere through my lack of ambition, became convenient truth. "This marriage is embarrassing," Emily said finally. Not angrily, not cruelly, just tired that I felt something then. But it wasn't jealousy. It wasn't rage. It was disappointment, sharp and clean. The kind that arrives when hope finally gives up pretending that I had stayed. Quiet for love that I had stayed small for honesty. And now silence was being used as proof of failure. The public story shifted overnight. I became the man who couldn't provide. The husband who couldn't keep his wife's attention. The mistake everyone pretended they'd seen coming. If you've ever watched your reputation change without your consent, if you've ever been rewritten by people who benefit from your erasure, you know the loneliness of that moment. If this chapter feels uncomfortably familiar, don't look away. Staying with a story like this isn't passive. It's choosing not to let it disappear. Claire thrived in the chaos. Sympathy flowed toward Emily, toward Ava, toward the difficult position they'd been placed. N01 asked me what I wanted. N01 asked me what was true to be by the time the dinner invitation arrived. The outcome had already been decided. Heavy paper, formal script, an address that carried authority, a family discussion. Claire called it. I stared at the envelope for a long moment before setting it down. I knew what it was. A stage. A verdict. And the final excuse they needed to end things. Publicly, cleanly, without ever having to admit what they'd done. I straightened the envelope and placed it back on the counter. Whatever waited at that table, I would face it standing, because sometimes the moment meant to destroy you is the one that finally sets you free. The dinner had been staged to feel celebratory. Candles were lit. Music played softly from hidden speakers. Plates arrived in careful sequence, each course announced like an event. Laughter drifted easily across the table, practiced and performative, the sound people make when they already know how the night will end. I arrived on time. That mattered to Claire. She greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't touch skin. Williams didn't rise from his seat. Emily stood beside her mother, hands folded, eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder. Ava sat opposite me, radiant and composed, her presence explained by nothing and justified by everything. Wine was poured. To family, Claire said. Glasses clinked. The jokes began gently. About work, about ambition, about the season of life I was clearly still navigating. Each laugh landed where it was meant to, on me, then floated away, leaving no evidence anyone could challenge. So, Alex, someone asked, smiling too widely, what's next for you? I considered answering, then decided not to. Claire leaned back, surveying the table like a conductor waiting for the orchestra to quiet. We're all here because we care, she said. And sometimes caring means being honest. Emily didn't look up. This situation, Claire continued, has become unsustainable. Williams nodded once. Final. Absolute. I think we can all agree, Claire said, eyes flicking toward Ava and back again, that mistakes were made. Ava's hand rested protectively over her stomach. The gesture was subtle, strategic. Emily inhaled. I heard it this time. A shallow breath, caught and released. I want a divorce, she said. There it was. Clean. Rehearsed. Applause followed. Not loud. Polite. As if they'd just witnessed a difficult but necessary decision finally executed. Someone murmured, "It's for the best." Claire smiled, relief softening her features. "You'll land on your feet, Alex," she said. "Not everyone is built for more." The word hung there, heavy with implication. Williams finally spoke. "We'll have our lawyers handle the details. It's better this way." Better. Emily still hadn't looked at me that I felt no heat rise in my chest. No rush of protest. Just a steady clarity, sharp enough to cut through the noise that I stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. The sound drew their attention more effectively than any raised voice could have. Emily's eyes lifted then, just for a second. Uncertain. Searching. "I hope you find what you think you deserve," I said, not bitter, not loud. True. Claire opened her mouth, perhaps to respond, perhaps to reclaim control of the moment. I didn't wait that I turned and walked away from the table, past the candles, past the plates, past the carefully arranged future they'd already written without me. Behind me, conversation resumed almost immediately. Someone asked for dessert. Outside, the night air felt like release. Sophia stood near the curb, hands in her coat pockets, eyes sharp. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She looked at my face once and nodded. "That it?" She asked. "That's it." We walked in silence toward the car. The house behind us glowed warmly, its windows filled with movement and voices. Life continuing without pause. Sophia stopped beside me. "You don't have to let them tell the story," she said quietly. "I know." "Then why?" "I'm done explaining," I said. "I've said enough." She studied me for a moment, then smiled. Not with relief, with recognition. "Good," she said, because they were never listening anyway. As we drove away, I made the decision without ceremony that I would not correct them. I would not justify myself, that I would not reveal anything to reclaim dignity they never offered. Some truths don't need defending, and some humiliations don't break you. They free you. I would never explain myself. Again, the collapse didn't announce itself. There were no headlines at first, no frantic phone calls, no public statements carefully worded by lawyers. It began the way real failures usually do, quietly, in places no one thinks to look until it's too late. Months passed and I returned to my routines. Early mornings, long walks, work that never stopped humming beneath the surface of the world. Apex Synergy continued its expansion without interruption. Markets adjusted. Systems evolved. Decisions made in glass towers rippled across continents. That I said nothing, did nothing, watched. The first crack appeared in a casual comment I overheard at a cafe. Two men in tailored suits, voices lowered, frustration poorly concealed. "Williams' overseas deal fell through," one said. "Funding froze overnight." I didn't look up. Soon after came the emails, industry whispers forwarded by colleagues who didn't know the connection. Credit lines suspended. A merger delayed indefinitely. Investors quietly stepping back, citing uncertainty. Claire still hosted her gatherings, still wore confidence like a second skin. But the guest list shrank. The smiles tightened. Laughter arrived late and left early. Williams stopped attending charity galas altogether. The second crack came when a mutual acquaintance reached out to me directly. An invitation masked as concern. "Heard you've been keeping busy," he said. "Rough time for your former in-laws." I offered a neutral response. Polite. Detached. Accounts froze without explanation. A lender called in a loan ahead of schedule. Another followed. Then another. An unfamiliar name surfaced in the paperwork. A holding company no one recognized, methodically acquiring distressed assets, buying debt at a discount, consolidating quietly. No press. No noise. Panic crept in where arrogance once lived. Emily called me for the first time since the dinner. Her voice was careful, brittle. Have you heard anything? She asked about. She hesitated. My parents. The business. I paused. Just long enough. I've been busy, I said. Silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. When she spoke again, it was an accusation. It was something closer to regret. They're struggling, she said. I didn't realize how bad it was. I imagined Claire pacing. Williams staring at spreadsheets that refused to make sense. The certainty they'd always relied on slipping through their fingers. I'm sorry, Emily added. And for the first time, I believed she meant it. But remorse arrives late when it's been invited by consequence. The unknown holding company accelerated its acquisitions. Debt changed hands. Timelines tightened. Grace periods vanished. Williams made calls that went unanswered. Claire leaned on connections that suddenly remembered other obligations. People who once needed them now had options that I remained exactly where I'd always been, just out of sight. Sophia visited one evening, bringing takeout and news I already knew. They're unraveling, she said. Fast. I nodded. They've scheduled an emergency meeting, she continued. Investors, advisors, anyone who might still listen. Where? She smiled slightly. Glass Tower. Downtown. I knew the building. It was mine. Sophia watched me carefully. You don't have to go. I know. You could let them fall without ever seeing you. I could. She waited. But silence has done its work, I said. Now it's time for clarity. The invitation arrived the next morning, formal, desperate, addressed to the holding company's representative. The tone was respectful, urgent, hopeful. They had no idea who they were asking for help. I set the letter down and stared out the window as the city moved below, unaware of the convergence about to happen. Of the past walking straight into the future it had dismissed. The boardroom was being prepared, seats arranged, screens tested, presentations rehearsed. They believed this meeting would save them. I knew better. And for the first time since that dinner, I allowed myself a small, quiet certainty. The moment they had tried to erase me was about to become impossible to forget. The emergency boardroom meeting was scheduled, and I would be there. The boardroom was too quiet for the number of people inside. Claire sat rigid at the long glass table, hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Williams stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear, whispering to someone who wasn't helping. Advisors shuffled papers they'd already memorized. A screen at the far end displayed a single slide with a waiting cursor, blinking like a pulse. Emily sat apart from them, shoulders drawn inward, eyes fixed on the polished floor. She looked smaller than I remembered, not diminished. Unprotected, the door remained closed. Minutes passed. Every second sharpened the air. Williams ended the call and turned. Where are they? He asked no one in particular. His voice carried the weight of a man unaccustomed to waiting. Claire checked her watch. They'll come, she said, though the certainty sounded practiced. They know what's at stake. What was at stake was everything. The screen flickered, then went dark. The door opened. I stepped in first. Calm, measured, a tailored suit, nothing extravagant. Power doesn't need ornament. Sophia followed at my side, her presence steady, unflinching. The room froze. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then Claire's breath caught, a sound small enough to miss if you weren't listening for it. Williams took a step forward, then stopped, confusion breaking across his face like a crack in glass. Emily looked up. Her hand flew to her mouth. Alex? She whispered. I nodded once and took my seat at the head of the table. Sophia sat beside me. The chair felt familiar. It should have. I'd chosen it years ago. An assistant tapped the tablet. The screen lit up. Alexander Sadomian, founder and majority owner. Apex Synergy Group valuation. $1.10 trillion. Silence fell hard. Claire stared at the screen, then at me, then back again as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. William's mouth opened, closed. He sank into his chair without realizing it. Emily's shoulders began to shake. Quietly. She didn't cry out. She just folded inward, the truth landing all at once. I don't understand, Claire said finally. Her voice trembled despite her effort. This has to be some mistake. It isn't, I said. Not cold, not cruel, simply accurate. Williams leaned forward, hands braced on the table. You're saying, I'm saying Apex Synergy acquired your debt, I continued. Every line of credit, every outstanding obligation. Quietly, legally. Sophia slid a folder across the table. Documents, signatures, dates. Williams. Hands shook as he flipped through them. Claire looked at me then, not with contempt, not with dismissal, but with something like fear. Why didn't you say anything? She asked that I met her gaze. You never asked. Emily let out a sound that might have been a sob. William swallowed. We can fix this, he said quickly. We can restructure, renegotiate. We're prepared to offer. I'm not, I said. The words landed without force. That was what made them final. Claire's composure cracked. You owe us nothing, she snapped, desperation leaking through. But this is unnecessary. I tilted my head slightly. Is it? I stood, slowly, giving them time to look at me, really look. Not the version they'd invented, not the role they'd assigned. The night you decided my worth, I said. You did it without curiosity, without restraint. You mistook quiet for small, modesty for weakness. Williams stared at the table. You don't get to ask for mercy from someone you refuse to see, I continued. You don't get to call this unfair when you built your world on exclusion. Emily looked up at me then, tears streaking her face. Alex, I didn't know, she said. I swear I didn't know. I believed her. That, I said softly, is the tragedy. Claire stood abruptly. What do you want? She demanded. Money? An apology? I shook my head. This, I said, meeting each of their eyes in turn, is the price of arrogance. The words settled into the room like dust after a collapse. I won't refinance, I added. I won't extend timelines. Apex Synergy will proceed as outlined. William's shoulders sagged. Claire sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her face. Emily covered her face with her hands. I gathered my things and turned to leave. Sophia rose with me. N01 stopped us. N01 could as the door closed behind us. The room remained silent, filled with people who finally understood what they'd lost, and a future that would no longer wait for their approval. The collapse finished the way all collapses do, quietly. And then all at once, within weeks, the properties bearing Claire and William's name were rebranded or sold. Boards resigned. Accounts were emptied by necessity, not choice. The people who once returned their calls within minutes suddenly found reasons not to answer at all. Invitations stopped arriving. Familiar faces disappeared from events they no longer hosted. Status, I learned, is loyal only to itself. Ava vanished without drama. No farewell. No explanation. Her absence was as calculated as her arrival. The scandal that had once consumed so much attention simply evaporated, leaving behind only the damage it had justified. Emily moved through the aftermath alone. She withdrew from social circles that had defined her identity. Friends who once crowded around her for proximity to influence now treated her with careful distance. Not cruelty, indifference. The hardest kind that we spoke once. Briefly. She didn't ask for reconciliation. She didn't offer excuses. She only said, I see it now. That was enough. That I didn't rebuild my life. I resumed it. Apex Synergy expanded into regions most companies avoided. Infrastructure projects reshaped logistics networks. Partnerships formed without spectacle. Growth continued not because of conquest, but coherence. I chose leaders who listened more than they spoke. Teams that valued precision over performance. Power doesn't shout. It works. I became more visible, not because I needed recognition, but because leadership demands presence when it matters. I spoke when there was something worth saying. I remained silent when noise would have diluted truth. Sophia often reminded me how different I seemed now. Not louder, not harder, but clearer. You're not hiding anymore, she said once. She was right. That I no longer shrank to fit rooms that never wanted to understand me. I no longer edited myself for approval that came with conditions. I stopped mistaking patience for self-erasure. If you're still here, if this story stayed with you, it's because some part of it feels familiar. Maybe you've been underestimated. Maybe you've been measured by standards that never accounted for your depth. Maybe you've been told, subtly or directly, that your quiet disqualifies you. It doesn't know your worth, even when it isn't recognized. Especially then. Let results speak when explanations fall on closed ears. Let time reveal what performance cannot. The world is loud with people trying to be seen. But the ones who move it, the ones who shape it, often do so without announcement. They build, they wait, they endure, and when the moment arrives, they don't need to prove anything that they're already standing at the center of it. Never mistake silence for weakness. The quiet ones usually own the world.
What would you rate this story from 0 to 10? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's build a global community rooted in kindness, love, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with someone who would enjoy it too. Your support brings us closer to our 1K subscriber milestone and fuels our mission to create more emotional stories centered on resilience, healing, and Black excellence. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. Your presence truly matters.